Recording. Okay, so I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the City of San Diego Commission on Police Practices Ad Hoc Transition Planning Committee meeting of Friday, July the 16th, 2021. And I will do a roll call by looking at the Zoom participants. I'm Doug Case. I am the chair of the committee. We have with us Patrick Anderson, a member of the committee, and our outreach chair. We have Joe Craver, a member of the committee, Nancy Vaughn, a member of the committee. We have Diana Dent, a member of the committee, and we have Brandon Hilpert, ex officio member of the committee and chair of the commission. We have Kate Yavendetti, our liaison with San Diegans for Justice. We have our outside counsel, Chris Cameron. We have our interim executive director, Charmaine Mosley, and we have our Charmaine's executive assistant, Alina Conde, who will be taking notes today. I didn't receive any public comment, Charmaine?
No public comment received.
Okay.
So,
I don't know what that noise is coming from you, Charmaine. Okay. So updates, nothing new regarding the budget process, other than there have been some glitches in transferring things from boards and commissions to the office of the Commission on Police Practices. And so somebody shut off Charmaine's cell phone because it was no longer being paid for by boards and commissions without telling Charmaine that was going to be happening, and so forth. Staffing, Charmaine, what is the status of the hiring for the complaints coordinator position?
we just completed our interviews this past week, and the committee and I will be meeting shortly to go over. Sorry about that noise.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're still in the process of going through the applicants right now.
Okay. And then the next item is the assistant executive director search, and Charmaine did some research into funding options for an executive search firm for that, and I'm not quite sure I understood your email, Charmaine, so maybe you can explain. The question we were asking the city finance department was, can we use some money that had been allocated for salary for the position, since it's not going to be starting on July 1st, to reallocate the money that would have gone to salary to executive search.
Can we come back to this one, just because they're doing a lot of drilling upstairs and I can't hear?
Okay, yeah, we can come back to that. Well, the next item is the implementation ordinance and the permanent operating procedures. And I think everybody should have received the memo that was sent from Mara Elliott to Council Member Monica Montgomery Stepp regarding the use of the Commission's outside counsel to assist with the drafting of the ordinance. According to the memo, the city attorney's office, and I guess Joan specifically, who deals with Joan Dawson, who deals with these issues, has been tasked with both completing the draft of the implementation ordinance and drafting a protect ordinance, which is an ordinance that'll deal, among other things, with pretext stops, and that will be a time-intensive task. And the memo asked if or suggested that we utilize funding for the CPP outside counsel to handle the draft of the implementation ordinance from here. According to a Twitter and Facebook post last night, it sounds like the council member is amenable to that. Her wording made it clear that the ordinance will proceed under her direction. So I wanted to discuss that. That raises a couple of issues. I think a main one is if Chris is working with us in developing recommendations for the ordinance, and is working with District 4 in developing the ordinance. How do we deal with a conflict that might arise if there is a disagreement between how we choose to proceed and how the council member or other members of the council choose to proceed? So that's one issue. And then a second issue is that we're still trying to figure out the contract issues, which we discussed last week. And we have Charmaine has set up a meeting with well, I think the meeting is with Joan and purchasing and contracts, and me and Brandon on, I think it's Thursday, to talk about that issue. The issue is whether or not we can allocate the money that we had in our budget for outside counsel, can just assign that to Chris's contract extension, or whether it requires a new RFP, which is what Bill Gersten seemed to be implying. We were intending to have Bill Gersten at that meeting, but he is retiring as of today. So I guess there's a couple of funding issues. Is how, can we simply assign that money to our current outside counsel by extending her current contract? And then I guess a related issue is whether the money or the funding to do the drafting of the ordinance, should that come out of the CPP budget, or should it come out of the city attorney's budget? Because this is basically doing a job that is, a duty of the city attorney. And so will they be giving us funding to do this, or were they expecting us to do this from the money that we have allocated? And actually the budget made reference to the funding for a general counsel, but our funding for general counsel is only for 1 month, because we were anticipating we're going to hire a staff position until then. Although it was my understanding that that the money between the outside counsel and the general counsel is flexible. So if we wanted to hire a general counsel sooner, we could do that and use the money that had been budgeted for outside counsel toward that. But we also wanted to wait to hire a permanent staff attorney until we have a permanent executive director and a permanent commission. And so those are some of the issues that are involved in this. And I'll let anybody else who has a thought on this speak up.
Well,
Thank you for that, Doug. Oh,
okay. But
go ahead, Patrick.
I was just going to say thank you for that, Doug. I was very happy to get this news yesterday. And I want to thank Kate and Women Occupy and San Diegans for Justice and others who really, this is one of the points in particular that they latched onto, that there should be outside counsel, outside the city attorney, working on this draft in consultation with lots of different stakeholders. And so I I was so relieved to see that. I think it's really important who gets hired to do this. And it needs to be someone with expertise, with a particular kind of legal expertise. And I think we should, as a committee and as a commission, we should make it clear that we as commissioners have a particular kind of expertise now in community oversight of law enforcement. And we need the legal representative to have a similar kind of expertise, not necessarily in oversight practices, but in civil rights and in drafting this kind of legislation. I wanted to say that. I think it's a very, very good thing that this is happening.
Okay, Kate.
Well, I want to agree with Patrick, especially, his thanks to us. And I'm not even going to talk about what I think about this memo, but I do think that it's important, two things. One, that the CPP is the group that picks this outsider independent legal counsel, and that that person would certainly work with Chris and would work with the voters ordinance and with, as Patrick was saying, other stakeholders to work on the ordinance. I think that that you're right, Doug, in raising the question of a potential conflict with with Chris's firm and her representing the CPP, and whether that's independent of somebody who's actually drafting this ordinance, and she can chime in on that. But I think I think the other thing that I'm concerned about, and I don't exactly know the process of how, assuming the CPP says, okay, we're gonna hire independent legal counsel to draft this, and this is what they're going to do. What is the process? Do you have to send out an RFP? What is the timing? I'm concerned about more delay. So I'm hoping that something can get started really quickly, because we're really hoping that we can get a good draft ordinance before PSNL in September, and certainly no later than October. And I think if you get somebody who's in tune, as Patrick was saying, not with civil rights issues and with how the commission needs to operate. I mean, what the commission's charge is, what the realities of your work is. And and I think Chris can certainly work with this committee can certainly work with council on that. I mean, those were clearly major defects that the city attorney's draft just had no clue how you work, what your needs are, and really what the law is. But it's a separate issue. So so I would hope that this committee would be able to get back to whoever you need to, whether it's Monica or whomever, with a proposal that there immediately be some kind of a search or a job announcement or something to get applications in for this particular position. And I guess you're going to have to sort out where the funding's coming from. I agree with you that it should not come from the CPP budget. I think it is a city responsibility, and whether it comes from the city attorney's budget, I mean, I think, of course, as you know, the city attorney should never have been involved in drafting this ordinance. But since they're now not going to be, let's take that funding and use it for truly independent counsel to do that, and get this moving as quickly as possible, so that that person hopefully can be on board in the next 30 days, work on it during the recess and get something out quickly, and work with us. I mean, somebody who would be coming to these meetings, just as Chris has been, so that that person can hear what the commission's concerns are, and we can get something that really works both for the commission, but also for the community. These are my thoughts.
Doug, let me ask you a question. If along with Kate, if we want the city to go ahead and pay for this, that could take a long time, because they would go through the process of going through that process, and that could take a long time. What is there any reason why we can't do that? And if we do that, are we required to put out any RFP, or just why can't we just go out and hire somebody?
Well, a couple of things. The proposal, if you read Mara's letter, is that it's going to come from our money. I mean, it very specifically talks about the money that was allocated for the general counsel and so forth. They're talking about money that was allocated for us. And it also was specific as saying that they wanted to expand or extend the contract for Chris in order to accomplish that, which kind of gets back to the issue we had before is, can we, if we're going to be expanding the scope of the work, does it require a new RFP, et cetera? So I guess we'll get some answers to those questions when we have our meeting on Thursday. And so I guess we can report back next week. And we also have set up some meetings with the cabinet, meeting with the members of the PSNLN, and we've already got 3 set up. We have for meeting with Monica on Monday, we're meeting with Raul on Monday, and we're meeting with Stephen Whitburn on Friday. I think the Friday meeting is after our meeting, and I'm not sure what the status of setting up a meeting with Marty von Wolpert is. So we can also raise this issue when we meet with Council Member Montgomery Stepp on Monday. It's only a half-hour meeting, and so I think we got a whole lot of issues to discuss. So we'll see how that goes. Chris, did you want to weigh in on this?
One of the things that I would suggest is, I think it's good that you're meeting with Councilmember Montgomery Stepp, and that is to whether there's a desire to return to a bifurcated process, i.e. a very simple implementation ordinance that gets a new commission in place, and kind of which doesn't contain meet and confer issues. And I realize that may be frustrating because it will push back things like how the business is going to be accomplished. But it may move you along more quickly toward getting your in-house counsel, which could be a person that is skilled in both being counsel to this board as an in-house person on a day in, day out basis, but also in terms of writing the kind of legislation that you need to and the procedural documents that you need. And I know that's kind of, it feels like a step back. And so I certainly don't want to get into out of my lane in terms of policy, but but it may solve something.
A related issue we wanted to raise with the council members is the fact that our numbers are dwindling. We will be down to 16, see if there's any interest in them going back to that bifurcated approach, or if there's another way that we can get interim commission members appointed. And so that also will be on our agenda for our half-hour meeting with Monica Montgomery Stepp. What about the issue, Chris, of how we would deal with the fact that you are our outside counsel and advising us, and some of our recommendations may be counter to those of D4 or other city council members? So who would you be reporting to in this process, I guess, is the question.
Well, my client is the police commission, and so anybody who assists you, it's not like I would be in a different conflict type situation than somebody that you put an RFP out for, quickly get somebody on board who has those skills. They would continue to work for you. It doesn't mean that they cannot confer with Councilmember Montgomery Stepp or the in some way and bring those issues back to you. But what they would be drafting is what the police commission's proposal is for the city's implementing ordinance, which is, I don't really see how the city attorney cannot be involved in this because her client is the city of San Diego. Her client is the city council that is having to do an implementation ordinance for a measure that was passed by the voters. And so while the laboring oar might be done by your council, there's still going to be a point in time when the product is turned over and the city council renders on whether they see legal issues from a broader city perspective. That's not an avoidable sort of route. For example, in terms of the Ethics Commission, it frequently makes recommendations on election law changes for the city, and those become the recommendations of the Ethics Commission. But before they are presented to the council, they have to go to the city attorney, who sometimes will come back to us as the commission and say, we see a legal problem with this, and we have a thought about how we might resolve it or something like that. And so that process continues to happen, even though the Ethics Commission has independent counsel with special skills in ethics laws. Whenever we're writing city laws, there's an interface period that has to occur with the city attorney.
Okay.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah, because part of my concern was the way that the council members' post was worded, and that this would be done under her direction, and I think that'll have to be clarified,
Right.
that you would be our attorney. Although I could see, a benefit of this is that we can resolve issues and come to a meeting of the minds between the council member's office and the commission prior to the ordinance going back to the full PS and LN. And so it could be a good way to move things forward expeditiously, but we need to figure all this out. And I saw that Brandon put in the chat that
I can actually say it. I was just typing it there. I think when we created our budget for what we thought our legal expenses were going to be, that was solely for.
And you're freezing. Hopefully it's just you are freezing and not me.
Yeah, he's freezing. He's frozen.
Okay.
But he said, what he said is that we budgeted for the work we needed. And right. I agree with Brandon. And I see Nancy did too in the chat. I've learned from, thank you, Chris, for that thoughtful response. And what I learned from it is that the budgeting for this needs to be based on who the client is here. And if the client is the council, if Monica Montgomery Stepp is directing this process from here on out, and an outside counsel is being hired to draft an ordinance under her direction, then that suggests that the client is the city council. And so it's a bit messy here, because if the city is the client, they already have an attorney. If what the city attorney is suggesting is that that she basically subcontract an outside attorney to draft on behalf of the city, then I'm less impressed by this move. So I think the question of who the client is here, to use that vocabulary, needs to be clarified. And that will affect where the budget line is. If it turns out that the commission is the client, and that the council has in mind that we will take the role that we should be taking, which is to use our expertise and the community input and so on to help shape this. And I should say the People's Ordinance, which is a really good starting place that was drafted, then I think it will be incumbent on the city to, as Brandon's suggesting, increase our budget to the exact dollar needed to contract an attorney to represent us. But the question of who the client is here needs to be clarified.
Yes, and I guess part of the key issue. Okay, so I think
that means who is actually in control of it then? The final word, is that what Patrick's saying? Okay, thank you.
And who pays for it? I mean, those go hand in hand. Although I guess, the city could, give us well, if the client is going to be the city council needs to pay for it.
I understand the money issue. I'm just not real smart when it comes to the political part of it, Doug. And it's kind of, it can be a little bit different. So thank you.
Yeah, and yes, there's a lot of issues there, which we'll work through hopefully in the coming week and have better clarity next week.
Well, I have a question. Is there, her memo was kind of typical of what we get out of the city attorney's office, and that is not real clear about some things. So I'm wondering if there's an assumption that when there is a new draft before it goes to PSNLN or whatever, that it still goes back to the city attorney for their vetting as far as any legal issues that they would see. Or are they completely cutting themselves out of the process? I don't know that that's clear it's not clear to me.
Yeah, you're right.
So you were saying that, independent legal counsel and the city council is going to put this together and it's going to go to PSLN and through the process, but I'm not, and I'm not sure, because I'm hearing that maybe that the city attorney still has some sort of a role. They're just not able to draft it for, reasons that they've said of overwork, and has nothing to do with the politics or the obvious conflict in their drafting it. Do you know, Chris, does it have to go back to them?
I don't. I saw the memo for the first time yesterday in a Twitter tweet, although Charmaine had sort of told me verbally about the notion that this was coming. And I was perplexed by the kind of cover comments by the councilwoman. And it's an unusual way to structure this. Measures happen and pass all the time that require implementing activity. The strong mayor proposal did, lots of things do. And it's the legal advisor for the city is the city attorney. So I don't see a way for the city attorney to be uninvolved, because I think that in any case, it's still going to be her duty and responsibility to ensure that the implementation, like if we were to write an implementing ordinance that went way off into some crazy direction, it would be her duty to say, this is not in the measure, or this is, in conflict with the measure, or in conflict with some law that she's aware of that it would be a problem for. So, so I don't know that you can completely divorce yourself from it, particularly when you're asking another independent body to do that drafting. Or even outside legal counsel. She would still have a duty and a responsibility before it gets presented to the council and adopted. I appreciate and understand the politics of this particular issue is different than strong mayor or some of the other kinds of measures that may have passed. And I understand that she maybe wants to put it past the laboring or to somewhere else for political or workforce work reasons or whatever, but there's going to have to be some involvement of the city attorney's office at some point in this. At a minimum, when we get to meet and confer issues, we don't have authority. You don't have authority as this independent body to undertake meet and confer. So there's going to have to be something worked out where everybody, both entities are involved.
We're talking. We're doing a lot of talking about this, and we've done a good job of identifying the challenge and the problem. But what is the solution, and what's the next step?
Well, I guess the solution is to clarify these issues when we meet with the contracting office and the city attorney's office on Thursday, to raise these issues with them and to get clarity, and also to raise the issues with Councilmember Montgomery Stepp. So we're trying to raise the issues, and our goal is to try to get clarity in the meetings we have next week, and then we can decide how to proceed.
Got it.
You may want to try to bring, I don't know if this is possible, but it seems like the fastest way to maybe get some clarity on these is to have the city attorney, contracting, Montgomery Stepp's office, and you guys all in one big meeting, Because the problem with, kind of bifurcating and meeting with different parties is that then you're kind of playing this sort of shuttle diplomacy between, 5 different participants, if you will.
That's not a bad idea. Charmaine, do you want to see if we can have somebody from Monica's office? Because the memo was written from Mara Elliott to Councilmember Montgomery Stepp, and so I think it would be appropriate to have somebody from her office involved in the Thursday meeting.
Yeah, so her chief of staff, Henry Foster, as well as Chloe Triplett, who's been working on the implementation ordinance, they're going to be present at next week's meeting with Joan Dawson.
Okay. Actually, now that you mentioned that, I did see that. I was thinking of that. They're going to be, and are they going to be present at Monday's meeting as well?
They should be.
Okay.
They should be. Yes, I know there's so many meetings going on right now.
So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. I'd forgotten that. Okay, let's move on. I don't think there's anything new with office space. The standing rules, the Rules Committee did meet yesterday, and as we had recommended it last week, they are recommending that the commission amend our bylaws so we can deal with the issue of requiring more than a simple majority and more than a simple 2/3 to pass motions. And they also recommended that we raise the issue again with city council members and meet with them regarding asking again if there's any way to fill empty seats on the interim commission. And alternatively, and then we have been told no before, but we can still suggest an alternative of having a bifurcated process. Anything new from community outreach?
No, not currently.
Okay, and Charmaine, since you're back, can we go back and have you explain what the issue or what answer you got regarding what our options for using an executive search fund?
Sure. So the email I received, the noise started back up again. Sorry about that. So the response I received is that typical practice does not allow for us to use personnel funds from non-personnel expenditures. So they would like us to, as far as the search, using that money for the search firm. So she wanted to know if they were, for us to be able to look at if there's a savings from the NPEs, which is the non-personnel expenditures first. Look at that first. And then if we don't have any savings from that, then we can revisit it and then sort of have that discussion as to using the money from the salary expenditure.
Okay.
I still have to reach out to her for her to be able to further explain it to me. It looks like we can use it, but we just have to have another discussion as to how to go about doing that.
Okay, so it wasn't a complete no. It was, is there a way to use non-personnel money first? And I guess we could look at the budget. We don't really have a lot of savings yet because the fiscal year just began on July the 1st. And we do have some money set aside for consultants, but this would wipe that out. And so I'm not sure we would want to do that. So we'll circle back to Charmaine and see what we can figure out there.
Okay.
We already talked about the legal counsel contract, and so we'll go back to unfinished business from last week, and hopefully Patrick did his homework.
Yep. So I'll give the update on this. So I'm looking at fiscal year 2019 at all stops and separating this out by division to figure out divisional representation as a part of our recommendations for diversity on the new commission. As you probably expect, this data is incredibly unwieldy and very difficult to use. Let me explain why. First of all, for fiscal year 2019, San Diego Police Department had 464,045 stops that resulted in citations of one kind or another. When you look at the different divisions, and again, these are police divisions, not city council districts, the concentrated higher, well, first of all, I looked at the populations in each of these rough districts, and they're all more or less equivalent because the police divisions map closely to city council districts, although not entirely. In any case, the divisions that really stand out in terms of the highest proportion of these kinds of stops are, as we suspected, Central, Mid-City, and Southeastern. Northern Division, surprisingly, is also in that top cluster. And the reason for, so let me say a couple words about the data. In addition to 464,045 rows on a spreadsheet, many of the stops have duplicate rows. And that's because a given stop may result in multiple citations. And so the data calls out each citation by a separate row on this spreadsheet. When you begin to filter those out, what you notice is that Northern Division, which includes everything from Torrey Pines down to Mission Beach, west to the border between Claremont Mesa East and Kearney Mesa, what you notice is that that division includes the largest chunk of the 5, a big chunk of the 52, and by far the largest beach area. And so a lot of these stops are moving violations on the freeway and people who are drinking on the beach. And so in order to fully understand what this picture looks like, we can't just rely on the unprocessed data. Now, there are lots of traffic stops, moving violations in the other districts too, but as a proportion of the total number of citations, Northern Division and then Northeastern Division, which has a massive chunk of the 15, have many, many more of these. Northeastern Division is not in that top group. It also has a lot of these moving violations. So I'm in the process of, figuring out, and I'm getting advice from others. I'm not just doing this myself. So I'm doing what I can to figure out what the actual breakdown is. But from the raw data alone, and again, Northern Division is in this top group, but that I think is because of the big chunk of the 5 and the beach. But Northern Division's in the group, and then as we suspected, Central, Mid-City, and Southeastern are a sort of cluster of the highest number of citations. And to give you a sense of how different the numbers are, I should also say, these only include officers associated with a particular division who know what division they're in when they make a stop. So let's say someone is on a chase and follows a car into a different division. They may not know what division they're in at that point. And so any of these citations in those sorts of cases where the officer is not sure what division they're in at the moment, or any specific task force or special ops unit, those are separated out into an entirely different category within this data. So those stops also, for the most part, happen, the special ops unit and so on, for the most part, happen in that central part of San Diego, Central, Southeastern, and Mid-City. But to give you a sense of it, Central Division of these, over 400,000 stops, Central Division accounts for 100,000 of them. Mid-City and Southeastern are right about 70,000 or a little less than 70,000. And the Northern Division, again, including moving violations and beach infractions, is also in that sort of 70,000. Then when you go out and look, for example, Let me just give you an example. Where is my cursor? When you look, for example, at Northwestern Division, which starts in Sorrento Valley and Torrey Preserve and goes north to North City and Black Mountain, those numbers are 15,000. So that's the range here, between 15,000 in Northwestern Division and 100,000. It's actually 110,000 in Central Division. Similarly, when you look at, let's see here, Northeastern Division, which does, again, it includes a huge chunk of highway. So a lot of these are likely highway violations. There are 20,000 in that particular area. So less than a fifth of what's happening in Central Division.
What about Western? Because you had mentioned Western as a potential.
Yeah, Western Division, let me pull up
It
the
doesn't sound like it's
codes.
as much as we thought it might be.
Before we get too far into the weeds, I don't think we want to put into the ordinance what divisions, and in other words, we don't want to use the 2019 data to make that
No.
decision. What we want to do is have a general statement of what the commission should do in
Right.
making sure those beats are that those things are reflected.
That's right. And we want to build something in that's flexible, because
Exactly.
it's entirely possible that these percentages could change. You know, it's entirely possible that with improvements in public safety, Western Division could become a hotspot and Southeastern Division could become much improved in this landscape. And so I'm not using this data to build a percentage-based or seat-based allocation. I'm going to use it alongside a few years of the previous CRB data, so not just 1 year, but more longitudinal, to suggest a kind of framework for using data for future representation. And that's what I'll come back with eventually.
Okay, because that's what we want, is the framework that will go into the ordinance.
Right.
And so what we're looking at is rewording section G of the composition, which talks about 10 of the commissioners must resign, and police beats with the highest rates of warrantless stops, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we wanted to do was to rework that. And I mean, the exercise you're going through is helpful, because then by going through it, you know how you can kind of work in reverse of this is how we would do it.
Yeah, and that was an important intervention, because it's important to say I'm not trying to arrive at a seat allocation per division or anything like that. It's about coming up with a way of using data every few years to look at the commission and say, do we have proportional representation from whatever the areas of the city are that currently have a higher contact rate or complaint rate or what have you. And all those data need to be used together, not separately.
Okay. And so do you think by next week, you'll have a way of rewording a section G so we can develop that framework?
I'm going to do my best, but this data, these data are not, even though they're released as raw data because that's a requirement, they're unusable until you sort of factor out multiple citations for a single stop, until you figure out which ones are warrantless searches, until you figure out, which ones are fourth waivers. So I'm gonna stop processing this data at some point and move to, okay, this is what we know. How might we rearrange this? I'll come back with an early draft of a recommendation for that next week.
Okay. And so how are we doing on time? So we still got 15 minutes, and we were going to talk about subpoenas and investigations. And I might mention that Nancy, Charmaine, and Chris met with John Alden who is the executive director of Oakland. And that was useful, although we did discover that they have a very, very different model than we do. And actually thinking back upon it, that was the model that the city council members were saying, this is not what we want for San Diego. And so to understand his advice, you need to understand their model there. Their model is that they have a professional staff who have the ability to investigate all complaints, but they don't investigate all complaints. Kind of like us, there's some they're required to do and some they have the discretion to do. But it's all done by staff, and all the findings are done by staff, and there is no volunteer civil group like the CPP who approves those findings. The staff does the investigation and they come to their own finding. And Internal Affairs does a parallel investigation and they come to their own finding. And if they agree, then that's the finding. And if they disagree, they discuss amongst themselves, and kind of like us, if they can't come to a conclusion, then it goes to the police commission. The police commission is made up of volunteers, but they don't get into the details like we do. They deal with issues where there is a conflict in findings or there is a conflict in a discipline. Their police commission has a lot more power. Their police commission can hire and fire the police chief, amongst other things. We did discuss the joint interviews, and actually they have some court cases that are going on there, and they sent some details of the court cases they have regarding what rights officers have of discovery, and so forth. But I guess the bottom line there is, well, a couple bottom lines is that they do joint interviews, and they work. Their investigators work. I guess cooperatively would be the best word. They do independent investigations, but they share information along the way. They don't have, because when I first contacted them, I was asking for their written investigation procedures, and they don't have a lot. And he was recommending that we don't have a lot. In fact, he was kind of recommending we don't have investigation procedures, and we explained, well, the ordinance contemplates that there would be investigation procedures as part of the standard operating procedures that would be approved by the city council. I guess his primary, I think, advice was to keep them short and simple. They have an order that has been agreed upon by the department, that that their officers will participate in investigations, and he sent us a copy of the order. He agreed with our comment that we need to have that in the ordinance, because we can't rely on the police department to agree to that type of an order. And actually, the things we've been talking about putting into the ordinance of requiring the department to provide us with the all the records and so forth that we need. And so a lot of the things that are in, I guess, the voters ordinance are things that he concurred that that should be. They also don't have hearings, primarily because the person who does the investigation does the findings, and if there's a disagreement, they don't have any process for handling that. And so it's a very different, what'd you say, Nancy?
Well, they had a 3-person committee that they put together to resolve disagreements. And I can't remember at what point that came in, but it was the final word. Do you remember that? They put together a 3-person. I
think those were members of the police commission. And so I think it was a committee of the police commission that that does that, but they don't have hearings that the officer attends.
No, but they did have some way of doing sequential interviews that they called the same interview. That was the other thing that I picked up on. They didn't necessarily do their interviews at the same time. They would do it at different times, but they called it one interview because it was by the employer's interview, and it was in two parts.
And I didn't pick
Oh, yeah.
up on that. Chris, did that make sense to you?
Well, I haven't had a chance to look through the materials that he sent yesterday afternoon. I know that right now there's a disagreement among the circuits in terms of whether a second interview,
That's right.
you know, has the requirement to hand over documents to the interviewee, and they are on appeal up to the California Supreme Court. And I think our circuit down here is the one that has the position that a second interview is a second interview.
And so,
Thank you, Chris, for reminding me.
and so I think what I get out of it is I think we're on the right track in terms of the things that have been included in the voters ordinance need to be included there, along with well, another issue we discussed was the background checks for commissioners. And he recommended that it be included in the ordinance, that it needs to be independent of the department. And I'm forgetting, is that in the voters ordinance? Do you recall, Kate?
I believe it is. That I'll go back and double check, but we raised that because he mentioned that when I talked to him a few months ago. And it was actually something that had emerged from the community roundtables. It wasn't one of the top line recommendations, but it was there.
Yeah, and I think that because we talked about some wording, and I think actually the wording was not from them, but I think I was referring back to the voters ordinance, but that also there's an agreement that should be done, especially after the meeting that the cabinet had with the police chief a week or so ago, in which he seemed to have the impression that the police department would be doing the background checks for the potential commissioners and would be making a decision of whether they pass that. He did give us the name of the firm, so that they have an outside firm that handles it. And so it is quite feasible to have the commission contract with an outside firm. He didn't know how much it cost, but he didn't think that it was, that it was extensive. Well, now it's at 12:55, and so I'm not sure. What I was thinking of doing was looking at the voters ordinance investigation section and kind of going through to see if we agree, as well as the definition of investigations. And
do you want to just give that to us as homework so that we would all read it and come back with any questions or disagreements that we might have?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And so let me look and see if hold on just 1 second here. Yeah, so it's 26.1110, evaluation, review, and investigation of complaints, and that's pages 20 through, as well as investigatory proceedings. So that would be page 20.
And I think you're speaking from the San Diegans for Justice Implementation Ordinance.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
Okay.
yeah. So basically 20 through 28 roughly. And so it's a 26.1110 through 26.1115. So people could look at those, and because most of that is not included at all in the city attorney's draft. The city attorney's draft just has a very brief definition, incomplete definition of an investigation. And so that probably is one of the biggest differences between the San Diegans for Justice draft and the city attorney's draft. And so if we could take, have everybody take a look at that and see what they agree with. Because I would like to be able to at least do that by next week, because a part of our goal is to have a list of recommendations that we can make to the commission at our open meeting in January, so that as we have discussions, moving forward, we can speak. This is what the commission is.
In August?
No, actually, in July. But we
In July. Okay, you said January, and I thought maybe you were meaning August.
No, did I say January? I'm sorry. Yeah, at our July meeting, it starts with a J.
Hey, Doug, would it be possible to change our agenda format so that we start with new business and save updates for the end? So that we can make sure we get to this first next week?
We can next week. I think there's except that we're going to want to report back on the what we find out with our meetings this week regarding legal counsel. I
feel like we're at our best at the beginning of this meeting. And if we come in with our homework and start with that question and prioritize it first, and then make sure we save time for those updates, that might be, I don't know, we can try it out, see if it helps.
Okay, then we can rearrange the agenda for next week. I do want to include first the report back of what we learned from the legal counsel, because that'll be important moving forward. And then we can then put second on the agenda the looking at the investigation sections of the San Diegans for Justice, and then put both of those in new business. Well, actually, one of them would be unfinished business. Well, I'll figure out how to do the agenda, but we'll do it so that we spend time on those two issues first, if that's amenable to everybody else. Okay. And well, the city council takes the month of August off. Do we want to take the month of August off? I'm just kidding. It'd be nice if we could. Well, it's 1 o'clock, and I think we've come to the end of the agenda, the plan for the agenda today. And so unless people have other items they want to address, we can go ahead and call today, and the people have their homework assignment for next week. Everybody has the homework assignment of looking at the investigation procedures or sections of the ordinance, and Patrick has the additional continued homework assignment of reworking at section G of the composition. And with that, we are adjourned. Bye.
Thanks, Doug.